Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second forum series of the year. We're going to be talking about free speech tonight. My name is Hannah Combs, and I'm serving as the VP for Academic Affairs this semester. And it's my responsibility to coordinate these forums. Free speech is particularly relevant to us as a university because academic institutions are major hubs in the marketplace of ideas. But we're not just a university. We're a Christian university, and our theological orientation adds an entirely new layer of meaning on what it means to freely pursue knowledge. Tonight we will hear perspectives from these 5 panelists that will help us think about our calling as Christians to speak truth and to speak truth in love. The conversation tonight will be split into 2 parts, the guided discussion and the question and answer time. The guided discussion will conclude at 8:15, at which time we'll encourage all of you to write down any questions that come up for you, and then bring those up to me and Zach, and we'll ask those. Our moderator tonight is Zach Aument. Zach is an alumnus of Indiana Wesleyan, class of 2013. He has worked in marketing since 2005 and has worked on 17 political campaigns. He writes on theology, ethics, and political philosophy, and has taught courses in applied ethics and political science in Michigan. Most recently, Zach has returned to Indiana Wesleyan to study Christian ministry and practical theology.
So I would like to introduce you all to, perfect, okay. It doesn't really sound like it from here. I could actually do this room on my own. Before we get started, could we move up to the first 3 rows? I would just like to get everyone moved in. I know you're going to hate me for it a little bit. I can handle it. Knowing also that if you need to dodge out midway, that if you want to sit on one of the aisles, that's perfectly acceptable. Thank you all for being gracious with me. All right. The first panelist that I'll introduce to you is Alexis Jade Colón. She is a junior theater and writing student from Taylor University, and as a part of Taylor Playback Theater and Taylor's Multi-Ethnic Student Association, Alexis participates in opening safe places for community storytelling. Her work as an actress and writer is rooted in her desire to know the truth and what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. Bruehler is assistant professor of TESOL here at Indiana Wesleyan. She holds a Master of Arts in Applied Linguistics, and as a PhD student in Applied Linguistics, she is currently researching discourse patterns and practices as they relate to identity construction in first-year students at IWU. Her most recent paper analyzed the use of the word scripture as a social actor in legitimizing the community standards section of the IWU 2013-2014 handbook. And because this seems to be important within the IWU speech community, you should know that she has a husband, Dr. Bruehler, who teaches in CAPS, and 3 children, Soren, Pascal, and Eleanor. No one caught this argument, I'm sorry. Jack Collingsworth is a senior studying economics and political science, pre-law, with a minor in history. He is the president of IWU College Republicans and plays Indiana Wesleyan baseball. Jack cares deeply about education and desires the cultivation of a holistic, formative, intellectual environment at Indiana Wesleyan University. He is here tonight with the hopes of encouraging the discussion of truth throughout our campus and helping students to see the value of speaking openly and passionately about what they believe and what they desire to learn. Lauren Carpenter is a junior studying journalism. She is the editor-in-chief of the campus newspaper, The Sojourn. Free speech is very important to her as she wants to be able to publish a variety of stories for students to read so they can be better informed about the campus and outside of it as well. She would love to run her own magazine in the future, so free speech is necessary for her to be able to publish whatever she would like. Dr. John Conrad is a professor of political science here at Indiana Wesleyan, who was born and raised in Nova Scotia, Canada. He traveled in Europe and North Africa, while serving as a missionary with Youth with a Mission, YWAM, if you've heard of that. That's the largest missions organization in the world. He taught for several years at Wheaton Academy in West Chicago, Illinois, during which time he became a naturalized U.S. citizen. Dr. Conrad is married with 2 children and is currently in his 15th year at Iowa. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. So to get started, I am going to talk just a moment about the fact that we all have kind of a working knowledge of free speech and its role in a free society. And I want to ask and begin to get the discussion rolling with how is it that our work, so working from our working knowledge of freedom of speech guaranteed by the First Amendment to in the Constitution, in most cases we don't have to fear government punishment for things that we say. But the freedom of speech is not absolute, as in, for example, cases of hate speech, which have recently become public news and public forum, or when an individual is part of a corporation or institution like a university. Dr. Conrad, can you please elaborate a little bit on ways in which we have and do not have free speech as students and faculty at a university?
Sure, that's a great question, because sometimes we think we have more freedom than we really do. And I think it was in a Sojourn article, it might have been a few years ago, and there was some pushback by administration where a student was trying to have a political candidate come and just talk to students. So the school rented the room to the candidate, but then refused to allow the student to put up any advertising whatsoever regarding just inviting students to come and meet with this candidate. The explanation given was that, well, we're a private institution and therefore free speech doesn't really apply here. And I think that's only partially correct. I really do. I think that we are a private institution so that the school can put restrictions on what we say and, not supposed to curse and that sort of thing. I think that's a good restriction on free speech. But being private, we're also an academic institution. And thirdly, we're supposed to be Christian. And I think all 3 legs are what should center our discussion. And so as an academic institution, we want to, or we should want to, expand the discussion as much as possible, as broadly as possible, to take in all sorts of different voices. That hasn't really been happening. And as you look around the campus, what you see is nothing. You see nice buildings, but you don't see any posters, any advertisements. Why is that? That's the question we should be asking. Why is that? And too often the answer is because it's not allowed. And I think legally we can. I've got good evidence for that. But we haven't. And students have been maybe too willing to accept someone saying, oh, we're not allowed to do that without pushing. We don't like to push. I like to push. But sometimes students don't like to push.
I would like to pass a follow-up question on to the students. Have there been times where you have run into barriers to free speech that have actually shut down conversation and moved away from an open intellectual environment?
I can feel this, and before I go any further, I just would like to thank SGA for conducting events like this and trying to cultivate discourse and open discussion of these ideas, all these things that are very, very important and central to an intellectual academic environment. But when I first came to Indiana Wesleyan University as a freshman, a very ambitious freshman, I was really excited to get involved in everything in the university. Playing baseball, and I was pre-med, biology. Learned very quickly that the two are extremely demanding. And it was a very taxing, emotionally, totally physical time, of my life. But with that, like as ambitious as I was, I wanted to start College Republicans here at Indiana Wesleyan University. It had been here for quite some time, and it was just a missing block, a wholesome, experience here, especially for a lot of our social science majors. And my friend and I, Michael King, we went through the entire process of forming the organization. We went through every hoop that is required to be an organization recognized by the university, by student development, and we made it all the way to having the certificate signed and in our hands, and we were ready to go. Actually, as a matter of fact, Mr. Aument here was in the cabinet, for College for Republicans. And he is just an example of how ready we were to take on, a healthy political environment here at Indiana Wesleyan. And as prepared as we were, surely enough, being overwhelmed by my workload and everything else that was going on in my life at the time, my academic performance was, far from ideal. And so surely enough, I received an email from student development saying, you're not eligible to be in, a student-run organization here at Indiana Wesleyan University, and so you will have to improve on that before you can join one. And I recognize that. I recognize that there should be standards for being parts of organizations like that we should prioritize, our academics and our studies. But we should also exercise discretion. We should, realize the circumstances that students face. And as much as I wanted to discuss even a probational period with the university in order to just at least keep the organization afloat, that wasn't allowed to happen. And I had a good argument. My father had come down with cancer, in the middle of the semester. It was a very taxing time in my life. I chose to change majors, made adjustments to improve upon those academic standards, and just at least maintain the existence of the organization. But the university wasn't really willing to do that. And so, as well as Zach, the organization just kind of fell through. But at a university, in an academic, intellectual environment that should desire discourse and student interaction, we should make it easier on our students to organize. We should encourage them. We should desire it for all of our students to be involved in things that are messy, they're hard, but they are things that we have to confront now, because we will have to confront them later. And freedom to organize is a fundamental freedom that we have in our lives in America, beyond the university environment. So that is something that we should desire to cultivate thoroughly here, at a university. But that was my experience.
That's great. Could I get a 30-second follow-up as well as to how your organization could have benefited from hearing an opposite point of view expressed, and what kind of impact lively discussion may have had on student involvement?
Could you rephrase that?
Yeah, so for instance, if there may have been like a college socialists or a college democrats organization on campus, how might that have positively affected your own organization and the general student life here at IU?
Oh, yeah. Heck, if there was a college Marxist organization, I would have been jumping out of my shoes. Because as a political organization, we thrive on that discourse. We thrive on that iron that sharpens iron. Heck, we even discuss, co-founding organizations, college Republicans and college Democrats, because we wouldn't thrive on just a sterile environment where it's just one view that dominates. We thrive by interacting with, opposing views that conflict with one another, so that, both organizations can thrive and grow.
Thank you. I want to open it up a little bit to the other end here and talk a little bit. So Alexis, you're from Taylor, which is another partner school, a CCCU school. So you come from a similar Christian background, the students here at Indiana Wesleyan. And I would like to hear from you a little bit as to what particular constraints and freedoms have you actually been under at Taylor? And I want to just remind everyone that she is not an official spokesperson of Taylor, but is just voicing her opinions and experiences to be able to benefit our discourse. So.
Okay, well, as far as the freedoms go, we have a lot of student organizations, just like we were talking about, which allow I guess, a safe space for conversation. And these are all kinds of spaces. On multi-ethnic student association cabinet, and we organize events that allow different ethnic groups to come together and talk about their culture, other people. And the theater community that I'm in, we actually make the theater because we safely talk about things. And what we say in the theater stays in the theater, kind of that sort of deal, but we take what we learn with us into our academics. As far as restraints go, I've been fortunate in my experience to not experience that many, I suppose. Within our theater work, being a Christian university, we do have to cater our work to our audience in using discretion with our freedom of speech, I suppose. Deciding what the audience hears. For instance, if I'm using curse words on stage, that might be all my audience hears in the midst of this beautiful work of art I'm trying to display. So sometimes we do have to use discretion with those kind of things or with issues.
Would either of you two ladies care to comment to the same effect? What particular constraints and freedoms does the university, and particularly a Christian university, place on speech?
Speaking for the Sojourn, I know it's been hard sometimes with articles that we want to share. We've gotten lots of negative feedback on just stories that we want to share. It has nothing to do with our opinion, but we were going to hear what people have to say about it and what just to start a conversation with people, just so students can break out of the bubble, what we call fear, and just to be more aware of what's happening. And so sometimes we've posted something and people don't agree with it because it doesn't follow the standards and the rules here. And yeah, it's just kind of been a little frustrating and a little disappointing that we're not able to open up a discussion with people.
So, follow up.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to that. Thanks, Lauren, for saying that. I think that a lot of that feeling of restriction that students and sometimes faculty feel comes from the fact that IWU is a particular kind of speech community, and part of our speech community involves specific religious beliefs and values, and within that we have these unwritten, unspoken kind of expectations about how we're supposed to talk about issues and even what kind of issues we're allowed to talk about. I think that that really speaks to what you all have experienced with Sojourn, and I can go into more detail, but
Great, thank you so much. I'm curious to learn a little bit about what any of you would think as to how we should decide which restrictions and freedoms are appropriate. And I want to keep us really focused in on creating a community that simultaneously is both loving and intellectually stimulating. I think that a lot of times that those two parameters can create a really great framework in which conversation can happen. But I also want to know if there are some exceptions that you can think of in which one of those is not served by sticking within prescribed norms. I'd like to keep each of these comments somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes.
Oh, great. I'll go fast. All right. First. Fast works. All right. Give us 30 seconds right now. All right. I think when we talk about loving, I mean, I get that. But at the core, I'm less concerned about it. I really am. We've become almost a culture of Christian nice. That has to be, that's the rule. And I live in the political world, and people sometimes get inflamed and passionate. That's okay. And they might say things the wrong way. It's a learning institution. There's got to be space for people to mess up, say things the wrong way, and then the learning opportunity is we come back and say, okay, well, how can we do that better next time? instead of feeling I have to walk on eggshells because if I say or do the wrong thing, gone. The rug's pulled out from underneath me, I'm ripped up or sent out somewhere. It's just, I want space for people to be able to breathe and express ideas that might not be in the majority opinion. Yeah, I think that's healthy, and I'm not afraid of that. And so I can have wonderful conversations with people who think very differently from me, and I'm not worried. Anyway, that's my minute. Thanks.
Can I follow up with that?
Please.
I think.
As long as you completely agree with me.
Harsh. Well, and I think it's not helpful to think about free speech in terms of black and white. I think that it's definitely more of a spectrum. And I think that, I don't remember the exact question that you asked, but when I think about, how we speak with other people, to me, it seems like there's a spectrum of, good, okay, questionable, risky, and then taboo type things to talk about. And, I think that the question maybe about how do we do this within a Christian environment, I think what John suggests is that maybe it's okay to talk about the things that are in the taboo area as long as we agree. It's okay if we can disagree. But I think that because of the norms and expectations that are kind of out there, but not really specifically spoken anywhere, that if we even go into the questionable area, it's kind of scary. And yeah, but I agree. I do agree with you, John, because I think that we should be able to have an environment where it's okay to disagree, and that we can then move on. So.
And just a quick follow-up. I don't know what the taboo areas are, because we talk about everything in political circles. There is no taboo. This is true. Anyone who's been in my classes knows there's no off-topic. Everything is fair game. So.
I would say, though, that if you think about certain topics, what is talked about from the top down, and what's acceptable to be talked about in chapel, or what's not acceptable. I mean, I can think of particular instances. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But that those are the important places on campus that help define what is acceptable and unacceptable to talk about within our community.
So, if I can summarize a little bit of these 2 points, one of the things that it sounds like we're reaching is that there are certain environments, particularly learning environments like the classroom, in which there is a greater breadth of topics that can be discussed, as particularly with this essential understanding of the pursuit of wisdom, and that there are other forums where more regulated speech might be more appropriate. Does that sound?
Yeah, but when it comes to students, I want them to have something very similar to what they experience in the classroom, to be able to go outside the classroom and say, yeah, the college Republicans and the Democrats, we're going to be going, are going to engage, and it's okay. To have that freedom, it opens things up. And to see posters on the wall, it's okay. To get to that point where we can go, it's all right. Well, someone might be offended. Yeah, but they'll get better. They will. Still learn that the worst thing in the world is not being offended. It's being ignorant. And the only way we get rid of ignorance is by having these wonderful conversations, by hearing people who disagree with us. Yeah.
And I would argue too, that you talked about, and I talked about the areas that are regulated. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that chapel is so regulated, and that certain topics are not allowed to be talked about in a way that we can all pursue wisdom and truth. I don't know that should be off limits in such a public place as chapel.
I'd like to go ahead with the question, pass it on to our student panelists. How should we decide which restrictions and freedoms are appropriate in the university context?
Well, something I've been learning, I guess, as a student, is that Christ came to redeem us, but in that, he came to redeem our language as well, the way we speak and the way that we conduct ourselves. And if, as a Christian scholar, you are pursuing Christ, you're free to be honest, because your heart would be in the same place as Christ's heart. And if you're a Christian scholar, and you're free to be honest, you're also free to be kind. And there are ways of doing that, moderating your speech, in ways that glorify God, even in your scholarship, especially in your scholarship.
I think in response to that, and in response to the prior question, is that first of all, this university is not, it's not a clock, right? It's not something that the administrators or the founders have set in motion and they just leave it alone, right? They don't set rules in place that guide, the way the university is, I guess, regulated or controlled or however you want to describe it. No, they are responsible to exercise discretion with each situation. This is a Christian environment where our leaders are responsible to attempt to approach each situation with a Christ-like mindset, right? That wants to cultivate that love, right? And that intellectual stimulation, which oftentimes walk hand in hand. And they can do so by avoiding the pitfalls of bureaucracy, of setting just rules in place and expecting them to create this safe, sterile environment. But instead to address each situation with attempting to have a Christ-like mindset that we desire for everyone here to have, and to demonstrate that. Not to just, lay out blanket rules that are kind of ambiguous and hard to understand, right? These unwritten rules that we've discussed that kind of just, they oversee all that goes on. No, it's a discretionary issue. And like Dr. Conrad said earlier, is that mistakes happen. And it's the responsibility of the administration to help us students with those mistakes. It's their responsibility to love us, right? And to guide us and help us to learn from these rather than just waiting for accidents to happen and not really directly addressing them.
Yeah, I really like what Dr. Conrad said, that we can just talk about, we should be able to talk about whatever, because I was just thinking, growing up in church, sometimes, they would say, like, it's kind of good to question your faith, to explore the Bible and different readings and just what you believe. So that's what we should be doing here at school, too, exploring all the different issues and topics happening. And then I was thinking about, they tell us to be world changers here all the time, but then once we graduate and go out, we can't really be world changers. Like this whole time, we have to be talking about all the issues that are going on in the world.
I want to ask you a follow-up question. So that's germane specifically to your field of study and your endeavors. Occasionally, news reporters in general, and people in the journalistic fields, are accused of not reporting good news. They will talk about what's entertaining, and a very common response is that that's what sells. And so in order to be able to continue to have a voice, many journalists feel pressure to begin actually, they have to say something that people will enjoy hearing and continue watching, otherwise they lose the right and the forum to be able to present in their media. Have you experienced any of these similar pressures or any of these similar critiques within your own field?
Yeah, a little bit since I've been here. Thinking about sometimes, a few years ago, when I think sometimes they want to talk to people who want to hide things. I don't know if it's exactly answering your question, but here at the school, so when we ask questions, sometimes the faculty, they don't give us the right answers because they're just caring about school looking good. So sometimes what we do report might not be everything, but it's because we're not being told everything.
Iowa currently has a no cursing policy in its dramatic productions, or if there is cursing, so there's an accommodation for this. Students must be enrolled in a class that will view the production together with a talkback session afterwards. Does this policy contribute to or detract from an academic atmosphere?
Just seems kind of silly to me. I'm looking at the student handbook, and I really shouldn't because it just makes me lose hair.
It's out of current tomorrow.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate that. And there are rules on everything. I mean, you can't breathe without breaking the rules. There's stuff on sunbathing, on Halloween masks. I understand having a code of conduct. Student handbook's over 60 pages long. Faculty handbook is worse. Worse, ours is 200 pages, most of which faculty have no idea of what's in it, myself included. You get to a point where there's bureaucratic overload. And my concern with all of these, I'm not opposed to policies, I'm not opposed to rules, I'm not an anarchist, but I'm opposed to such heavy bureaucracy that students can't breathe, faculty can't breathe, without fearing that someone will report you or you've broken. I feel like the Pharisees are watching me. That can't we do better? Isn't there, again, to go back to my original point, that an academic environment should create space. Space for failure, space for mistakes. Because if we bring students here with bad ideas, let's say racist, sexist ideas, is that possible? Sure. Well, unless you're ever able to talk about those things, express those views, and learn, it's like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I never really thought of myself as being more racist or sexist, but boy, now that I'm in conversation with someone, now I'm learning some things. And we all have places that we can learn. But when things are so nailed down shut, we don't get the opportunity to learn. So I'd much rather have posters that I disagreed with, a dramatic presentation that I thought used poor language. I'll get over it. I'll be okay. Yeah. And to show people that, yeah, we can live in this world without being of it, but we want to have those conversations. Without that, we're not doing the right thing. I firmly believe that. We're not doing the right thing.
I would just like to add too, especially about the language question. You know, the majority of my family members, extended family, brother, cousins, that kind of thing, are not Christians. And, you know, at any given family gathering, when the kids are all together, you know, there's all kinds of colorful language happening and all kinds of crude jokes and things like that. And I remember hearing, actually I have two short anecdotes. One, I think one of the theater professors was saying, and this was several years ago, about how they had taken students to a theater production or something, and they were able to be on the backstage with the company that they had gone to visit. And they said, you know, at the first F-bomb that was dropped, you know, everybody from IWU was like, oh, you know, and he said right there, any type of witness that they could have had was just gone. And so, you know, part of me says, well, what do we do? You know, are we going to restrict so much so that people aren't even aware that real people outside of the Christian world use language like that? And how are we going to respond to that? You know, is it going to be like, oh, every time you hear it? Or are you going to be able to take it in stride and look past that part of someone's language and really get to know who that person is? And my other story is there was a conversation, and this was probably 8 years ago, about a movie that students wanted to have shown at the Globe, and it had a lot of language. And I remember someone on the committee who was reviewing it said, you know, people just don't talk like that. And I looked at her, I was like, really? And it was someone who had been in the Iowa community for at least 20, 25 years. And, you know, we take our kids to the doctor across the street from the hospital in Marion. And just later that day, we were out in the parking lot and someone had, you know, their small children and they were yelling to get the F in the car and, you know, things like that. And I just thought, really? People don't talk like that? Because, you know, I just took my kiddo to the doctor and heard it in the parking lot. And so I think that we're doing our students a disservice when we're not able to even recognize that this is a part of culture. Not that it's a great part of culture, I don't want to be misunderstood, but it's something that we should think critically about and understand, one, why people use bad language, you know, what that language is, and how do we evaluate that. And we do this in my linguistics class, so be ready if you're in that class.
And in regards to the talkbacks after the plays, you know, if I leave a theater production perturbed by, you know, colorful language, I think I speak for not only myself but a lot of other students that I would just call my mom.
Sorry, what?
Well, I would rather.
You were upset.
Yes, if I was perturbed by language, it is okay. Sorry, if I was perturbed by language in one of our productions, it's not the responsibility of the university to dialogue with me about something of that nature. I don't think so. I don't need a talkback session. I don't need to feel as though, you know, that we are young people that live, you know, separated from this world. That we live in this bubble, right? Because it's policies of that nature that tend to cultivate that mentality. So if I have a problem like that, I'm going to call my parents. It's not something I'm going to go to, you know, the administration about or someone on board. Sorry if no one got it.
Here's the thing, I don't think you can value someone else's life unless you listen to their voice and what they're saying. And not everyone uses our language. We in the Christian community have our own lingo that we speak with. And so if we don't value their language, how are they ever going to listen to ours? You know, and if we can't look past what they're saying to what they're actually meaning, then we've lost all opportunity to get to know them and to love them.
Hey, just a quick response to that. There's a theologian that I've been quite influenced by, who says anytime you want to learn a culture, the first two things you must do is learn to speak the language and as those who are called into the world, perhaps there is a place for learning language and eating food. Where would you care to comment?
Well, yeah, I just thinking about you know, kids who've been sheltered all their life, and then going into college, you know, public school, they're going to be completely shocked, and that's just what they're doing to us here. Then is we're getting sheltered and not knowing about what's happening in the world, and then we get out there in the workplace, you got your customers here, we got to speak a couple, you know, and just, you know, be shocked because we can't talk about that stuff here.
So we're going to move on to a direct question portion here as we're moving in the end. And I'd love to keep comments again between 1 and 2 minutes. And Lauren, actually, to start with you. How does your faith inform the stories you choose to write and publish?
Well, not all my stories do, because sometimes the world's sometimes or something, but I do try to make people aware of, you know, just different outreach opportunities we're doing here, or what someone's doing, because we also do community stories too, and just we go to our community to go do here on campus to expand, you know, our faith, and so that's what we try to keep that as a focus of how God is changing the campus.
Alexis, what is a Christian actor to do when faced with a script with explicit content?
Well, with any piece of art, I guess, as a Christian, I'm looking for truth. And So the first thing I do is go through my script or whatever it is I'm working on and find what it's trying to say, and then I compare that to my knowledge of God and the Bible, and what is God? What does God say about this? And when comparing the two, I often find that this piece of art I'm looking at can tell me something about God, or it can illuminate something about God that I didn't know before. And so I find redeeming quality in whatever art piece I'm looking at or working on. And once I find that redeeming quality, I do my best to be as true to the character or to the work as I can. Because in being true to that person's voice, I believe that the truth of what they want to communicate will come out. So I guess I have a little more of a, like with my speech, I do have some models in my pocket that have language in them, and explicit content. But I do cater them to my audience. If I'm in a room full of Christians, I'm not going to use language or content that will distract me from the message. And that's something we do at university as well. With the shows we decided to do, sometimes we'll have content, sometimes we'll leave it. So I think that's the way that I navigate that sort of.
Pastor Bruehler, as a linguist and Christian, can you please speak to the power of language for both good and ill?
Yeah. Language has a lot of power, definitely. And a lot of that power is what we ascribe to it. So if you hear a four-letter word and you have allowed that to have a great deal of power over you, then it will. And whenever you hear that word from anyone, no matter what the context, you will be very judgmental about it, and you won't be able to see past that to hear that person, like you said, that. And so I think that it's important as Christians that we think about language in a charitable way, and we think about how people use language to interact with one another. And, they're words. Words have arbitrary meaning, right? Or the meaning is ascribed to particular sounds in an arbitrary way. So, without going into explicit words, I just think, why is a table a table? Well, it's arbitrary. And it's the same kind of thing with words that we tend to have trouble with in Christian communities. And so I guess my challenge would be to think about, do you have power over words, or do you let words have power over you?
Thank you. Dr. Conrad, could you please speak a little to the stakes regarding freedom of speech and the responsibilities of Christians towards using language to bring about the kingdom?
Sure. I'm going to give it to you in one very short quote. I gave it to my students the other day, and I think they've been chewing on it for a while. The quote was from William G.T. Shedd, who was a 19th century theologian. He said, "A ship at harbor is safe, but that's not what a ship is for."
For Jack, would you mind please articulating a little bit about what it means for you as a student to be involved in a rigorous academic environment, and how free speech participates in your own learning?
Without discussing my mother again, free speech in a rigorous academic environment allows us to explore, right? It allows us to discuss ideas, challenge dominating paradigms, right? To address the culture intellectually, as we are especially responsible to do so at a Christian, at a Christian institution such as this. And really, I think an important aspect of it is that free speech really can help us to address doubt. That when we can really discuss, I guess, the inner workings of our minds and our souls and the things that resonate within us, we can be honest about them and open about them. It allows us to confront times of doubt. And that's not a bad thing. It's okay to have doubt. There's a stigma, often in the church, even beyond the church, that doubt is just a bad thing. We live in a culture of certainty, right? Scientific certainty that is the only, verification or standard of truth. But that is not true. And in a rigorous intellectual environment where you are constantly confronting ambiguity and doubt, you have to be able to speak freely about what you think and what you feel.
Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and break for a 10-minute intermission. So I'll ask you all to be back here at 8:25. And as far as intermission goes, feel free to get up for a moment and come back. The goal of this intermission would be that each one of you would craft one meaningful question of which I can ask the panelists over the course of the next half hour or so. So by the time 8:25 minutes, if you could have crafted one well thought out question, that would be very much appreciated. So go ahead.